One, two, three.
1, 2, 3, let's go.
It's Ghada, Amina. It's been a while.
It's been a while. Hi, welcome to Jetlagged Politics. We took a little break the past many weeks because of travels, but now we're back in our respective time zones. For those joining us for the first time, welcome to Jetlagged Politics. This is a podcast where we discuss everything from history, regional conflicts, to industry and tech, because as we've established before, everything is political. Today, we have an episode that we've had to rewrite almost every day for weeks because of the rapid and serious escalations we have witnessed and continue to witness each day. For those who managed to stay uninformed to this day, congratulations. But what are we talking about, Fada?
We are talking about how Israel kept itself busy for the last couple of weeks. First, it was the Pagers attack, then the walkies in Lebanon, quickly moving into ballistic attacks on Beirut and South Lebanon, leading to hundreds of civilian deaths, thousands of injured, millions of displaced families, and of course, the decimation of Hezbollah's senior leadership and the assassination of Hassan Nasrallah. Now we have an Israeli ground invasion in Lebanon, the simultaneous bombing of multiple Arab nations, Lebanon, Syria, and occasionally Yemen, and a new round of escalation with Iran. So, a seismic development is the least one can say about all these developments. Uh, so many questions here. Is it the beginning of a war? Or will the map of the Middle East be redrawn? Um, there is so much to unpack, but as we keep reinventing this episode, Amina, we asked ourselves, how can we productively contribute to the conversation amidst all the cacophony of analysis, breaking news, fact-checking, debates, etc., etc.
You know, in taking a look at everything being said and done on both sides of this humanitarian and moral catastrophe beyond Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, or even Iran. And when we look beyond each one's biases, wherever it is that you stand on this conflict, even if you don't care, I think all of us can agree that there are holes to fill, that what we are really missing is a basis that we can all get on board with, sort of a touch point for our differing paradigms. If it seems impossible to even have a conversation today, it means that we are all overdue for a belief update. I think we don't realize how that's the biggest danger to human existence. And that's not even an exaggeration at this point. So instead of rewriting our episode another 100 times and continuing to preach to the choir, we asked ourselves, how do we get as close as possible to objectivity? I was watching an interview of Elika Leban, who is an Iranian pro-Israel activist, and she prefaced her argument by saying, "This is not my opinion. This is causal reasoning." So, what is causal reasoning? It is using relationships between variables to understand how changes in one variable can cause changes in another. What's great here is that it can use math, which is unbiased, through functions, probability, and statistical models to identify patterns, make predictions, and assess the likelihood of causal connection. And that's great. Thank you, Elega. I think we'll do just that because we can all benefit from logical reasoning.
Absolutely. I want to join you to thank Elika because logical reasoning and critical thinking would be refreshing at this point. So, for this episode, we shall attempt to address causal effects, conditions, and probable outcomes, discuss potential scenarios over the medium and long term. Because, Emila, the short term is changing every day, it's too unstable, and it only provides two variations of the two only outcomes, a step forward or a step backwards for humanity and Earth. But I can already hear our viewers here screaming, are we gonna subject them and ourselves to a math homework here?
It's easy, or Well, make it easy. We'll use a simplified version of Bayesian process tracing, and stay with me here, nobody panic. It's just a way of figuring out how something happened by starting with what you think might be true and then updating your belief as you get more evidence to support or discredit that belief. Like meeting someone online, when you show up for your date in real life, you have a picture of them in your head of what they look like, their personality, what their interests are. And then as the date progresses, or as you go on more dates, you get to know them better. That image you have of them in your head gets updated based on new information that emerges from what they say, how they carry themselves, etc. And because assessing whether they're the perfect match for you can never be a clear yes or no, you would instead say, based on what I know, this person is 80% likely to be a good match for me. So it's the same principle for process tracing. Instead of jumping to conclusions, you carefully adjust your understanding based on each new piece of evidence, um, and gradually get closer to the most likely explanation. We want to show a method that allows our viewers to make or take any starting point anywhere they are on their journey of making sense of the Middle East and work from there to get closer to the most logical explanation. But first, and I apologize for the long monologue here, why are we picking this angle, Ghada?
I think, Amina, we are picking up this angle because there is so much data online and in the media and essays and books and academia. We can agree that information is available for all to interpret as they please, but within their belief system. This is where there is a problem because there is too much polarization. And so all we have left to agree on is the logic, or I hope so, to the point that where calling for a ceasefire gets you labeled as anti Semitic or worse. I want to give you an example. A few weeks ago, one of the greatest writers of our generation, Ta-Nehisi Coates, was told in an interview by the very outlets that once revered him that he was an extremist only because of his compassion for Palestinians. This raises the stakes to a point where we all have a role to play here, I guess. So this is why wherever you are, whoever you are, please, please, please send this episode to your friends and your enemies alike. There is only one condition. We only ask you all to question everything and to be honest about where this exercise will take you.
If you lie to us, you lie to yourself. And that's an unknown Tunisian meme that I love very much. So, how does this work, Ghada? Where should we begin?
We'll do a simple version of the theory testing variation of Bayesian process tracing just to show the methodology, and everyone else can take it from here. First, we need to decide on what we want to figure out. We can take inspiration from the current headlines. For example, is Israel committing genocide? Does the killing of Hamas leader mean the end of the war? Is the US in violation of the Lehi law by arming Israel? Or is Israel the custodian of peace in the Middle East? I think, Amina, in our case, we agreed that we are choosing to explore, is Israel defending itself? So after we decide what we want to investigate, then let's pick an assumption, what we believe to be the likely case based on the information we have, past behavior, or any inclination. This really is the moment where you get to dig deep into your heart to say what you believe to be true, even if it is just based on a hunch. There are no wrong answers here. After you formulate that assumption, you will give it a probability that shows how likely you think it is true. Here, you can also be as random as you'd like. Just be open minded. So don't start at 0, not confident at all, or 100 right off the bat. And since we want to be completely unbiased, our starting point, Amina, we will assume that Israel is operating within its right to defend itself. We will assign it a 50% probability of being true or false. That's our prior probability or initial confidence. And 50% means that we are undecided and aren't leaning towards any way or the other. Now, all we have to do is gather evidence, ask why, follow the causes, and adjust our confidence based on findings. But how do we weigh the evidence, Amina? Because some of the evidence would be strong facts, data, credible accounts, while others can be circumstantial or unverifiable.
Let's make it simple because normally each evidence needs to be tested to calculate the posterior probability of our assumption. We'll assume that all evidence is weak, even if it passes smoking gun and double decisive test. You don't need to worry about that in the simplified exercise. And we'll only update the confidence by 1%, even if it's unequivocal. For example, if Prime Minister Netanyahu comes on TV and says Israel is committing war crimes, that's a pretty powerful, hefty piece of evidence, isn't it?
Yeah, I would definitely qualify that as equivocal, yes. It would constitute an official admittance and should make it very unlikely that they are the victim and bring the confidence close to zero. But we are suggesting that something like that would only make it 49% likely that Israel is defending itself. Is it fair, Amina?
It's not right, but it's revealing of other things, and that's what this episode will hopefully prove. Meaning, the undervaluing or the gross undervaluing of damning evidence. But fine, well, we will pray.
Okay, then if we are playing, let's make it more interesting. So let's consider every piece of evidence supporting the assumption to be strong evidence and assign it 10%, regardless of its weight. 1 to 10 seems to appropriately sum the odds currently.
That is a little challenge, but let's do it. And if you're thinking instructions unclear, don't worry. You'll get the hang of it as we go, and we'll leave a bunch of links in the description for you to DIY your understanding of the Middle East.
Okay,
Sorry to interrupt you.
okay, and before we begin, a few mandatory definitions. And I see coming because those also can be biased. So we are using international law. The United Nations and international law define a country that is a victim of foreign attacks through a combination of key principles from the UN Charter and customary international law. The UN Charter, particularly in Article 2.4, prohibits the use of force by one state against another. Any use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of a state is considered a violation of this principle, making the attacked country a victim of aggression. Now, aggression is further defined by the UN General Assembly Resolution 3314 of 1974, which states that any invasion, bombardment, or military occupation, among other actions, constitutes aggression and makes the attacked country or state a victim. In essence, a country is seen as a victim when it faces unprovoked attacks, whether by military force, cyber attacks, or other forms of external aggression.
I think we should also get another definition out of the way right now, and that is self defense. It is specifically defined in Article 51, and we hear a lot about that these days of the UN Charter, which acknowledges that a state has the right to defend itself if an armed attack occurs against it. This article permits countries to take necessary measures in self defense until the UN Security Council intervenes to restore peace and security. However, any self defense action must be proportional and necessary to the threat. Customary international law also supports the concept of self defense, including the notion of anticipatory self defense, where a state may act if an attack is imminent, though this is more debated and requires a clear and credible threat. Then we have collective self defense, which is also allowed, where states may come to the defense of an ally under attack, provided that they have the allies' consent and the use of force is reported to the UN Security Council.
Thank you, Amina. This is absolutely crucial. I will just add a couple of key principles to self defense before we move on to our process tracing exercise. Self defense must be necessary to repel the attack, meaning that it has to be your only option. It has to be proportional to the threat posed by the foreign attack. For example, you can't fight rocks with nuclear weapons, and any response must be immediate to an actual or imminent attack.
Let's begin with our hypothesis. Israel is operating within its right to defend itself.
And let's pick up the 7th of October as a starting point, even though it is not really a starting point. Hamas launched an attack on Israel, killing 1,200 people and kidnapping 240 hostages. On the 8th of October, Hezbollah started launching rockets on the Israeli northern settlements in what will be defined by the group as a support front for Gaza. So that's the 10%, which brings us to 60% confidence that Israel is defending itself. Now, here is another one, Amina. On the Hamas and Hezbollah doctrines, they call for the destruction of Israel and pose a constant threat to its security. So we are now at 70%.
Indeed, the two groups have a history of infiltrating Israeli territory for terror attacks, including bombings, kidnappings, and armed assaults on civilians and soldiers, which they acknowledge necessitating continuous security measures and defensive response by Israel. Now that's 80%, and there is probably other evidence to be collected in favor of the assumption here, but let's now turn our attention to evidence that discredits it.
Yeah, so let's start with the legality of Israel's self defense. We have already established that a country is seen as a victim when it faces unprovoked attacks. Now, if we take the context of occupation and the 16 years of siege on Gaza, can we really say that this attack is unprovoked? Prior to the 7th of October 2023, according to UNICEF, for 16 years, Israel intensified movement restrictions, isolated Gaza, and heavily limited the flow of people and goods. The blockade, which is akin to an illegal economic sanction, led to economic decline with severe limits on agriculture and fishing, skyrocketing unemployment, and widespread poverty, leaving 62% of residents reliant on food aid. Another outcome is a power shortage provided only half of Gaza's electricity needs, resulting in frequent outages, while 78% of piped water became unfit for consumption. So that's the siege. Now, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres stated that, I'm quoting here, the attacks by Hamas did not happen in a vacuum. A new report also by the UN titled Genocide as a Colonial Erasure has just been presented by Special Rapporteur Francesca Albanese, and I quote her saying here that claiming that October 7th was prompted by anti-Semitism is a way to decontextualize history and de-responsibilize Israel. So while we can debate over the details of who did what starting October the 7th, we cannot establish that the attack was unprovoked.
Additionally, back in 2023, Israeli forces and illegal settlers reportedly killed more Palestinians in the West Bank than in any previous year on record, with further escalations in land confiscation and settlement expansions, which analysts cite as contributing factors to rising tensions. This is well documented by the UN Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, OSHA, and Save the Children. Now, to fully grasp the illegality of Israel's control over the Gaza Strip, we need to refer to the Palestinians' right to self-determination, which is protected by international law. Key sources include the UN's Charter, which enshrines self-determination as a fundamental principle for all people. We also have international covenants on civil rights and political rights, and economic, social, and cultural rights, both affirming this right in Article 1. You have UN resolutions such as 3236 and 67/19 explicitly recognizing the Palestinians' right to self-determination. And you also have the International Court of Justice advisory opinion of 2004, which is 20. How many years ago is that? 20?
Mhm.
Oh,
Oh my God,
and
20 years ago. Oh my.
wow, we're old. On Israel's separation barrier, also acknowledged this right as legally binding for Palestinians.
And as we are still addressing the context here, let's address the context in which Hamas and Hezbollah were created. Both Hamas and Hezbollah were formed in response to specific historical and political context involving brutal occupation from Israel and a need for a resistance. Uh, let's remind our audience that this happened at times where states are too weak, or in the case of Palestine, inexistent, to protect civilians. So both entities are a reaction to Israel's attacks.
So, in both cases, the failure of existing political entities to effectively address grievances, be it the PLO's shortcomings or the Lebanese state's inability to protect its citizens, created an environment where groups like Hamas and Hezbollah could gain legitimacy and support as defenders of their respective communities against foreign aggression. Earlier, we spoke of the doctrines of Hamas and Hezbollah that call for the destruction of Israel, but the opposite is also true, as reflected by in Israel, Israeli official educational material that teaches children that there is no Palestine, or even documented speeches of Prime Minister Netanyahu, Defense Minister Gallant, and all other spokespeople on the Israeli side calling for the complete destruction of the two entities and referring to Palestinians as human animals. So reciprocity is there and well documented.
Meaning, so I mean, in addressing the context through international law and official statements and assigning each piece of evidence 1%. So we have the UNICEF report on the blockade, the killing of a record number of Palestinians in the West Bank, as reported by OSHA and Save the Children, Guterres statements, the new UN report, which also recommends that Israel be unseated from the UN, a UN Charter, international covenants, UN resolutions, ICJ advisory opinion, and statements by Netanyahu and Gallant. We are at -9%, bringing our confidence down to 71%. So now let's just address the question of proportionality. The assault on Gaza has resulted in a high civilian death toll, raising serious concerns about proportionality in military responses. International law mandates that harm to civilians must be minimized during self-defense actions. Now, indiscriminate bombardment of densely populated areas in both Gaza and Lebanon violates the principle of distinction in armed conflicts, leading to accusations of excessive civilian death toll. We're talking about more than 42,000 people in Gaza and more than 2,000 in Lebanon. So that's another -2%.
Not only that, the complete blockade of Gaza, and I think we're about to go through a lot of -1%, so I'm going to start taking notes. So we have the cutting of water, that's -1%, food, -1%, fuel, -1%, and then medicine, another 1%. This and other happenings that constitute collective punishment, which is prohibited under international law. Civilians face extreme shortages of basic necessities. On the 9th of July, 2024, a group of UN experts released a statement that Israel's targeted starvation campaign has caused the death of children in Gaza and that famine had spread from the north to the rest of Gaza. Since then, the situation only got worse. Giving birth is now classified by the World Health Organization as a life-threatening condition. So we'll give all of that another -1% with the side of eye roll. The UN and updates on Gaza's humanitarian conditions estimate the death toll as an indirect result of the war to be in the hundreds of thousands and rising daily. So that's another -1%. The cost of damage to critical infrastructure in Gaza is estimated at around $18.5 billion, according to a new report released recently by the World Bank and the United Nations. That is equivalent to 97% of the combined GDP of the West Bank and Gaza in 2022. So that's another -1%.
I'm going to add the use of explosive weapons in urban settings. The explosions of pagers and radios in Lebanon have been labeled as terrifying violation of international law by UN experts, according to the UNHR. I'm going to give that -1%. Then the targeting of a humanitarian aid storage facilities in both Gaza and Lebanon violates international humanitarian obligations, another -1%. Restrictions on humanitarian organizations such as UNRWA and their operations further hinders the provision of essential aid, the denial of emergency medical care, worsening the already critical situation of civilians affected by the conflict. Another 1% here. The explicit targeting of humanitarian workers, regardless of their nationality, another 1% for this one. I just want to give an example that you may be familiar with. On April 2024, Israeli operatives targeted a World Central Kitchen aid convoy in Gaza, killing 7 humanitarian workers, including individuals holding dual citizenship, such as an American Canadian or American Canadian nationals. That's 1%. More recently, Israel has deliberately opened fire on European UN peacemakers in Lebanon, and I'm going to give that -1%. And with that, I believe we are now down to 57%.
You know, Ghada, just last week, Human Rights Watch issued an article titled North Gaza Between Depth and Displacement. As the Israeli military escalates its offensive in northern Gaza, it has ordered the entire civilian population to evacuate while simultaneously cutting off food aid to those who remain. This situation forces residents into an impossible choice, whether they evacuate amidst the threat of airstrikes or starve to death. This brings us back to the ruling of the ICJ back in January 2024 that found it plausible that Israel's acts could amount to genocide and issued 6 provisional measures ordering Israel to take all measures within its power to prevent genocidal acts. Looking at what's going on now, and if the ICJ is to have another ruling, I am not sure it would find that Israel's prevented the genocide. But in any case, the ICJ gets only -1% because this is all very weak stuff. And who does the ICJ think it is?
Okay, so the ICJ is the International Court of Justice, just for the friends who, as you said, Amina, managed to stay away from the news for the last year or so. And I don't think it did have to work hard to find a plausibility for genocidal intent with all these Israeli official statements. And this is the same for the genocidal actions, with the IDF soldiers happily documenting the torture, the indiscriminate killing, the child murder, the desecration of human bodies in videos, and sharing these videos through Telegram, TikTok, and Instagram. Um, I mean, in a recent article intended to educate us on the traumas of war from the point of view of a soldier, um, published by the CNN, titled "He Got Out of Gaza, but Gaza Didn't Get Out of Him." An Israeli soldier returning from war, struggling with trauma and suicide, he admitted to running over hundreds of people, dead and alive, with a bulldozer. And he referred to human beings as meat. And he said that because of that, now he is not able to eat meat because it reminds him of the bodies, the human bodies he ran over. But let's ignore the normalization of war crimes here and just speak of the post-traumatic stress disorder that he is suffering from. I just want to say that the definition of PTSD itself doesn't apply in Gaza, where people and mainly kids are suffering from chronic traumatic stress disorder, according to an article published by The Guardian on April 2024.
I think we need a minute here.
Yeah, heavy, right? Um, as we keep saying, Amina, while preparing for this episode, we've been witnessing all of this, we've been seeing it, but still, we don't get used to it, even after working on this episode multiple times and knowing that all of this happened. But let's also address the colonial intent as the elephant in the room here. Just last week, government minister, she's actually the equality minister, May Golan, she said that permanently claiming land in Gaza was an appropriate punishment for the Hamas attack. She said, and I quote her here, if they use their land to plot a Holocaust, they will get a second Nakba. And I think this is really interesting because it's two admissions in one. The first admission is that it's their land that now they're occupying, talking about Gaza, and then also a second Nakba, an admission to the first Nakba that took place in 48. The Nakba is the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians from their villages and cities in historical Palestine, or what's going to become Israel in 48. And it's also a good opportunity for us to remind ourselves and our audience that over 80% of Gaza's population are refugees. So I think we can agree that ethnic cleansing further weakens Israel's claim that it is operating within its right to self-defense. And with this, we are down to 54%.
Israel, self-described as the most humane army in the world, claims that it communicates with civilian populations before attacks, leaving them ample time to evacuate danger zones where their security may be jeopardized. It has, however, in another violation of international law, not provided safe zones or evacuation corridors for people to flee bombardments. Instead, using these to target them in large numbers. So that's another minus 1%. Israel has also denied entry to Gaza for neutral observers and journalists. Restrictions on international monitors and journalists limit independent assessments and violate transparency norms in conflict situations. With another minus 1%, we're at 52% and can bring that further down to 51% by noting the targeting of journalists in both Gaza and Lebanon, killing over 150 professionals on duty. Over 75% of all journalists killed in 2023 died in the Gaza war, as per the CPJ.
And just to add to that, Amina, the war in Gaza witnessed the killing of the highest number of journalists in the history of the world, like even in comparison to World War I and II. But let's make it a nice round number by taking off just another 1% due to the absence of immediate threat justification. And I'm not making anything up here. On September 2024, the defense minister, Gallant, issued a statement saying that Hamas no longer exists as a military force in Gaza. And there is so much more to be said here, but we don't really want this episode to be 5 hours long. So let's stop at our initial state of neutrality. For our hypothesis, Israel is operating within its right to defend itself. That's a 50%. I just want to say that all of this raises some important questions about the Israeli intentions and whether it is really self-defense what Israel is intending and pursuing here. Because it's hard to ignore the troubling language from Israeli officials who have referred to Palestinians in dehumanizing terms, comparing them to Amalek, and even calling them human animals. And then the forcible displacement of the people of North Gaza that is actually happening now, and the imposed starvation and the massive destruction. And then there is the recent resettlement conference and the general plan that they admitted that they are conducting in northern Gaza. And then the laws that have been issued by the Knesset, the new law that blocks the establishment of any kind of Palestinian state, which seems to completely disregard the Oslo Accords and all the other peace agreements with the Arab nations that were based on the idea of two-state solution. And then the other law that the Knesset issued that forbids the activities of the UNRWA. It also seized the lands on which UNRWA headquarters is built to build 1,440 illegal settlements on it in East Jerusalem. So I'm just wondering here, is Israel really pursuing self-defense? I mean, like, if anybody is listening to this, you really believe that Israel is pursuing self-defense, or is it just using the situation to push forward a more strategic agenda? Maybe, I'm just saying, maybe they're aiming to establish a Jewish state that stretches from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, as their finance minister Smotrich suggested just a few days ago.
Ultimately, it is up to our audience to decide how they interpret the cause and effect relationships between events and the implications that they carry. What may seem obvious to us seems to not be obvious for many others. Otherwise, the war would have stopped much sooner. We encourage everyone to stay informed, think critically, and engage in meaningful conversations about what's happening. We'll, of course, be sharing our sources for you to form your own opinion and hope you enjoy this format. It is, of course, a heavily customized use of Bayesian process tracing, but we believe it makes the point that it needs to make. Thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time as we continue to explore these important issues together. In the meantime, please don't hesitate to continue playing the game we've introduced and let us know what you think in the comments.
Yes, please continue to play the game. As we said earlier, please share this episode with your friends and enemies alike. And don't forget to subscribe and like, and also leave us a comment. Tell us what you think if you are watching us on YouTube. And join us next time as we continue to navigate the complex world of Jetlagged Politics.
Thank you, Ghada. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bye.